On today's episode, I'm going to be interviewing Margaret Yang from MY Advisory. She's an expert in e-commerce product strategy, and we're going to talk about the intersection of product strategy, merchandising, and conversion rate optimization. Let's take a listen. Margaret, thanks so much for coming on today. Can you tell us a little bit about what it is that you do?
What do I do? Okay, let's see. I have over 20 years of experience working for retail and e-commerce companies, essentially helping them grow their business primarily through product strategies. I've worked with large companies, startups, in management consulting, helping that way. And then about 7 years ago, I decided to take all of that experience and launch my own independent consulting firm called My Advisory. And within My Advisory, I do the same thing. I support founders and executives as they're trying to grow their retail and e-commerce companies. And I have sort of three main offerings, three ways that I usually do that. One is through like fractional or interim key executive roles, like a head of merchandising or a go-to-market lead. I also do traditional strategy delivery, deliver strategy projects. Usually that's like a product roadmap, something like that. And then I do coaching. I do leadership coaching to help leaders figure out the best ways to manage their teams and drive their business to get the growth that they want.
So a lot of the folks listening to our podcast today work in e-commerce. So
Yeah.
They'll know your lingo. They know how this works.
Great.
But what are some of the problems that they're maybe tackling today that someone like you would be really helpful to help them with?
Yeah, I think, from a functional perspective, I grew up in the world of merchandising, which has evolved into site merchandising and product strategy, especially with the growth of online shopping, which was practically non-existent when I started. But I think, I always start with the basic of just figuring out who is your customer. And then the question is, what are you offering or delivering to that customer that is unique to you and that they want? And then I think when it comes to the world, so that's true in all retail, but I think when it comes to the world of e-commerce and where you and I have worked together with clients is what is the best way to communicate that via an online store, whether it's through marketing messaging, whether it's through the shopper flow, all different things. But how do you make what you're offering, the value that you're offering to the customer clear and then making the whole process easy for them?
And I'll do a little sidebar here for the audience. So if you're listening along and wondering, this format sounds a little different than usual, Margaret and I have done some great work together over the years. And one of the things I love to do on this show is not just highlight great store owners and examples of sites that can improve their conversion, but also to bring on experts who I've worked with so that we can talk about the really interesting intersections between what we think of as like the user experience of the store and how we drive conversion rates and how that intersects with these other disciplines. So I'd love to go there now. So tell me a
Sure.
little bit about how you see that relationship between what your expertise is and then how we've worked together in the past and that intersection.
Yeah, I think the place where I traditionally add the most value in that intersection and where you and I have worked really closely is understanding the customer very clearly and understanding the offering of the company, like the product that is being sold and why those are a good match, right? Why is this product the product that is right for the customers that we're going after? And then really making sure that as we are going through the user experience and optimizing along the different steps of the shopper journey or whatever part of the website we're focused on, the homepage, the cart, whatever it is, having those things in the forefront of our minds. And I think you and I have especially worked together when sometimes that product story is a little bit complicated, right? Like you're selling a t-shirt, okay, but we have also sold products that are customizable, personalizable, with lots of different variations and options. where a new customer might really have a lot to learn, but an experienced repeat customer really knows exactly what they want. How do we make sure that we're treating all of those customers and giving them the experience that they need? Um, well, going back to that, why is this the product for them? Why should they be buying it from us?
Yeah, one of the test ideas we often find ourselves thinking about is we work with retailers who have a lot of products to offer, and it's complicated to organize it all.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been really grateful when I get to work with someone like you because not only can my team say, it's really overwhelming how many products you have, let's try a bestseller page, but we actually have more information that you can draw on to say what should be merchandised on that page.
Right.
Um, can you have any tips for folks that are thinking about their product selection and how they might kind of figure out what are the things to offer new visitors?
Yeah. Well, I think you sort of said two things there. One, I think when you kind of think about, you started to talk about the nav and the way that customers or retailers might organize their products to communicate to consumers, and that's through the nav. And now, the nav has so many different ways that you can use it, whether it's visual or text and etc. But I think that in general, especially people who are very close to the business, um, overcomplicate things. So I think it's back to that kind of really understanding who's the customer and how trying to remove yourself. I think this is where I a lot of times add value because especially a founder or someone who's, a designer who's been creating this product and living and dying and breathing it, they're so close to it that they talk about it in a way that doesn't resonate with the customer and especially a new customer. Right. So to help a new customer understand, sometimes the product is complicated and new and different, something they've never bought before. So how do you understand what even is this thing before you get to why do I need it? And before you get to, okay, now that I want to buy it or consider buying it, I have 27 options decisions to make sure and I get the version that's right for me. Um, and then, I think the bestseller sort, having something like that is great. And you could take that even up a halo higher, which is, how do you curate some of these things in the nav, right? Whether it's bestsellers, whether it's if you're a new customer, start here. Or, maybe it's something else depending on the product category. Maybe it's for a certain sort of type of design aesthetic. Like if you are minimalist and modern, start here. If you are, bright and colorful and maximalist, I mean, I'm making these things up, but, I think the idea back to who is shopping and how are they thinking about the category um, that you're selling.
Yeah, I think that's such an important piece. Like we often are finding in e-commerce, we're so often talking about the what and not necessarily the who and why that person might need this brand or need this product. Um, we're often thinking of it in the context of like the landing pages, like what's the first experience of this brand. But I think that there's some interesting things around product and merchandising there as well. So tell me a little bit about your thoughts about the relationship of that first impression of the product, whether it be through imagery or video or the text that's used to describe it.
Yeah, it's so important. And it's interesting because it's so much more than even just whatever the product is, right? And I think we a lot of times think about that on the homepage, right? We always think of the homepage as this big branding moment. It's your storefront, it's your window on Fifth Avenue, right? But the truth is that a lot of customers bypass the homepage, right? The way that things work today, they come in on a category page, they come in on a PDP, whatever it is. So how do you make sure that you're reflected anywhere that someone might drop into the journey? And I think, like you said, product photography. I think another thing is that sometimes we forget that customers are going to see the photography and the video way more than they're going to read the text. They're not going to read the text until you've got them with the photography. And then it's also like, how does everything around that feed into the brand, right? Whether it's your header, whether it's the font that you use, all of those different design elements play into the total experience. and, not to be a broken record, but like if you really understand your consumer and where they're coming from, that should be tied into this like brand expression that runs throughout the experience.
What are some missteps that you see with e-commerce brands, especially maybe one that's still in, like the founder's still operating it? And you mentioned sort of the bias or like being so close to it, but
Mm-hmm.
what are some of the ways that shows up? Like, what are some things that listeners might look for in their own experience in their own store that would point to, oh, I'm too close to this?
Mm-hmm. I think making assumptions. I'm thinking specifically about like the brands that we've worked on together, but it can vary so much. I work on lots of different types of products, but this is for kind of like a more complicated, maybe more customizable type product. I think there's a lot of sort of assuming that customers know more than they know and sort of asking them to jump sort of mental hurdles because it's so top of mind for you, right? So whether that's, and then I think that comes through also a lot of times in the copy. I know I said copy comes second to photography, which it does, but a lot of times even just the words that we use about, I'm also thinking about a company I've worked with that uses really unique materials and the way that they, really thinking about how do you talk about those materials in a way that resonates with the customer. And maybe is like a less technical, like you could use a very technical term for what this material is or why it matters, but that might not actually translate to the way that the customer thinks about it or what the customer would want. And then I think the same thing in these like very multi-step shopping experiences. And this is where you and I partner so well together because when there are so many different steps, I understand the steps backward and forwards, but then you come in and can help really figure out the best ways to make the experience clear for the customer as they make their choices.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting topic that probably a lot of e-commerce stores struggle with. This is balance between education and getting people confident about what the product is and how it works, and then the simplicity in understanding it as well.
Mm-hmm.
We often are really looking to brands to, you know, take this big block of text that you have on the homepage or on the product page. Like, how do you boil it down to the essence of what you're trying
Mm-hmm.
to convey? And I'm curious, like, what kinds of approaches you use when thinking about maybe like product descriptions or what kind of information needs conveyed. Do you have maybe some like types of information that brands should make sure to at least consider conveying to their customer?
Yeah, it's funny, but this doesn't exactly answer your question, but what I was thinking of is I think something we've done together and I've also done with a lot of other clients is this idea of it's sort of the educational content and then the transactional content, right? The part that's going to help them in the decision-making process higher up in the funnel and then actually get them into the converting process. And I love to play around with testing those things and potentially giving a different experience to different customers, right? So even on your product page, like having an element that is, higher levels of education for having higher levels of education for newer customers but then repeat customers who've been there a number of times, maybe pushing that content lower down on the page so that you can really help get them into transacting.
One of the things that we've worked on together in the past is balancing choice with having too many choices.
Mm-hmm. This
Tell
is
me
my
what
favorite. This is my favorite part of my job. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, tell us about that. How do you
Yeah.
even broach the subject with brands? And then how do you start to like dig in and solve for what the right mix is?
Yeah. It's really interesting. So this is really tied to like assortment strategy and core merchandising, which, originally when I first started learning merchandising, you were limited by literally the square feet of your store, right? How many tables did you have? How many inches of shelf space did you have, et cetera? And then I think we went through this period of, we're online, the options can be infinite, which yes, they can. And for some brands, that's the right way to go for, a variety of reasons, which we could talk about. But most most of the companies that I work with and the companies that I like to shop have a curated assortment. And it's back to sort of that visual part of the brand that we talked about. The way that you curate and being that trusted editor is another way that you speak to the value that you are offering. So, and this can come into so many different things, right? Like, it's how many different categories do you play in the first place? How many choices do you have within each category? How many, if it's relevant, how many colors or designs do you have within a given style? For some customizable products we've worked on, like, how many options becomes too many, where it's just, exhaustion for the customer rather than fun. And how is that different for different customers? So there's a lot of different things to boil down. And I love it. Like, it's one of my favorite things to do, to assort and curate the assortment in the first place, so that then when we get to the point of how do we display it and share it with the customer, it's you've already done that step. To your point about talking to especially like founders or designers, or even sometimes, merchants, it really varies. But I'm always assessing from the beginning how emotionally connected people are to the product and to the line. And there's financial concerns too, right? Like, if it's a product where you have to buy inventory against it, a lot of times there's just black and white numbers that tell you that having less is literally more when it comes to your bottom line. But sometimes some products you're not holding inventory, they're print on demand or whatever. But you want to reinforce that brand story. What are we offering here to this world, and how do the categories and the options that we offer play into it? And I think you and I have even used testing to try to help answer that question, right? And you can do it in multiple ways, but even when you look at a page and how many options show on that page, and do you get a higher level of conversion or click through when you show 20 versus 40 versus 100 versus 500, right? And so you can use that kind of data too to help you understand, or that brand filter. There's a lot of different things, but I'm a huge fan of a curated assortment. I think
Mhm.
it shows a strong point of view, and it's back to the brand.
You reminded me of a bunch of tests that we've done together, and I think there was kind of two approaches that we took to just like the product density, I maybe would think about it. So how many products were on a single page, but also how densely populated was the page. Because a lot of brands will have 5 products across the screen, or on mobile 2 or 3 or maybe 1. And I found it's so interesting. It's so product specific for how much detail people are expecting when they're comparing across products versus when they can click in and see that bigger image. So I always find that kind of testing really surprising and very brand specific.
Yeah. And the type of photography that you use
Mhm.
plays in so much to that type of thing. Like, we talked about it more kind of on the product page, but on the category page where you're showing 3 or 1 or 5 across or whatever it is. Like, I've worked in children and babies apparel, and we've talked a lot about, is it better to show the product on a figure or on a lay down where you see more detail of the clothing with a lay down, right? Especially as we have more and more people looking on their phones on those small screens. But there's all this emotion to seeing a baby or a kid's smiling face, etc., right? So there's also elements of pros and cons of all the different types of photography, and then how do you use rollover, mixing those different types. Like, so many different things come into play with that. It's so fun.
Can you give us a 101 on product imagery? You just mentioned a bunch of different words, but I'm curious if you would put them in certain buckets for our audience to think about.
Yeah, I think, so you have sort of the core image that you're going to show on the product category page. And I think it's back to when we talked about the landing page and like not everybody's coming in through the homepage, right? So you have to think about, even for the category page, this might be someone's first interaction with your brand, right? So what is the story that you're telling? They clicked on something that told them that they wanted to come and look at little girls' dresses. I'm totally making it up. And so here they are. And what are you telling them, right? And I think you're always trying to find the balance of helping them understand the details of the product, but then also helping understand the emotion of the brand, right? So when I think about this example specifically, just to continue on with the same example, I think in a lot of ways, the showing the product detail closer up, so more of a lay down, is going to give a stronger sense of really what they're buying. But maybe you intersperse that with every fourth or fifth image is actually of a little girl wearing the dress, so that you get, and she's twirling, or she's like doing something that, or maybe she's very serious and somber, depending on your brand, right? But something that reflects the brand. And this is the kind of stuff where I'm not really an expert in this, but I've worked closely with these people, and this kind of stuff just blows my mind, is even the way that you shoot a piece of clothing when it's laid down on a table, right? Like, is it perfectly flat and smooth? Or is there a little flip in the skirt, even laid down on the table, to show a little bit of movement? And all of these things, even though the customer isn't going to come to the page and go, oh, I love the movement in the lay down shot of that dress, they're going to have a feeling, right? And when you combine that, we talked about font, we talked about color, with all of the other components on the page, you really start to evoke emotion, which is really what the brand is about. And then combining that with the actual product that you're selling. Yeah, so there's that, the rollover, having multiple products. I know we've played around with, and I think I often am playing around with, when you do offer a dress in 5 different colors, do you show all 5 colors of the same dress on the category page? Or do you just show one with some color boxes underneath, or some words that say more colors available? I mean, there's infinite possibilities. That's where I think always coming back to, who is the customer and what are we standing for and what are we delivering? Because a lot of times having those two things at the forefront of your mind can help you have a starting point. Because you can A/B test a lot of different things, but you kind of need a starting point. And because the options are infinite, you need to kind of start from somewhere. And some places you just have to go with your gut or your years of experience in other places. And, and I think answering those 2 questions always helps you get back to those answers.
And I do find that brands will often have made a pretty strong choice about some of those assumptions, and that could be a great starting place. But it makes for this sort of optimization opportunity where you made me think of this brand that I worked on, where they sold equipment for golfing. And one of the things they had was lots and lots and lots of selection. And the selection was reflected in the complexity of the filtering system that was available, and the complexity of the display of how many choices there were within each product. And part of our job ended up being, yes, it's true, actually, people are coming here for complexity and lots of choice. And then we would test in where simplicity made sense. So it was like, from a brand perspective, that complexity and variety of the merchandise made a lot of sense for them. And then teaming up with us, we were able to say, okay, there's a couple moments where we can go counter to that, but at least the brand has made a really strong assumption as a baseline.
And I can imagine in that situation too, there's a question of, is it a different experience for different customers? I mean, maybe everyone who comes there are, really pro golfers and understand the equipment already, and they're not really catering to like a novice, like I would be if I was buying a set of golf clubs. But maybe there's also a slightly different experience for either a new customer or a new golfer. And that's back to what we talked about earlier, that curated set. Instead of bestsellers, you might have something that's like new to golfing. Come here, and we're just going to tell you what to start out with. You don't need the most expensive set. This works for most people. Or here's a quiz, answer these 3 things, and we will get you on your way. And that's a very different experience than for someone who wants to go through all of that
The
complicated.
pro user who knows
Yeah,
exactly what they want
exactly.
and they want a
Mm-hmm.
comparison shop. Yeah.
Yeah.
The third persona I often like to throw in there too. It's like there's the novice to this brand or this experience, there's the expert, and then there's the gifter. So someone who
Mm.
knows nothing at all, is not
Mm-hmm.
interested in learning,
Yeah.
but maybe has an expert in their life they're trying to buy a gift
Yeah.
for.
Yeah.
And to me, the pair of those three things give us really good kind of extremes to explore when we're
Yeah.
thinking about a UX point of view, and I suspect from a merchandising perspective too.
For sure. And that's something, from a product development perspective, a lot of times you're thinking about that when you're developing the line too. Like
Hmm.
what are the products for the gift giver? Probably nobody's going to buy this for themselves, or maybe they are, but it would also make a great gift. And we think about things like gifts by price bucket, right? So then how do we make sure that in Q4 we have, depending on the brand, like a gift in the $50 bucket, a gift in the $150 bucket, or whatever it is? Because the last thing you want is to get to the point of trying to create an experience online where you have gifts by price, but then your assortment doesn't offer those options, right? So starting thinking about that from the very beginning, or, gifts for different types of recipients, whether it's your mom or your friend or your dad or, whoever it is, and really making that easy. Because that's also the kind of thing where maybe not for golf clubs, but in a lot of sites, if you can get the customer in and give them a really great experience. I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm on so many websites at Christmas time getting ready for gift giving. I'm like, if I could knock out a whole bunch of different people on my list on this one site, I'm 100% going to do that. So how do you think about that experience too, which might be a different experience than someone who's just coming to buy golf clubs for their, avid golfer family member?
Yeah, I think what I'm taking away from our conversation here is I think what actually brings our fields together is not just the certain test ideas of we should try this or that on the e-commerce experience, but we're both coming at it from such a customer-centric approach of
Mm-hmm.
what are the right products? What is the right site experience? And at
Yeah.
the end of the day, that is how businesses make more money, is by meeting the customer with their needs and with what they want right now.
Yeah. And I think just to add to that, I think that the earlier in the process that those two parts can come together, the better, right? Like tied to what I was just saying about making sure you have the gifts by price when you're doing product development, which sometimes is, 9-12 months ahead of, when you're going to start selling it, the more that we can kind of collaborate together. And I think that used to be the case traditionally with store merchandising and assorting. But as we get more to online, I don't think it's always in the top of people's minds. They assume we can make the website fit whatever we want. But if you can really align those strategies early on, makes a huge difference.
Margaret, thanks so much for being on today. I have two final questions for you.
Okay.
One is if you could give one piece of advice to folks listening who have an e-commerce store about something they should consider or think about, what would that be in regards to your area of expertise?
This is kind of broad, but you'd be surprised by how many people don't do it. So I think it's what I have to say is make sure that you are very clear on who your target consumer is. Who are you trying to service or sell to? And why should they buy your product and your service? And make sure you're super clear on those two things and put it up on a post-it on your wall. Make sure everyone else on your team is also clear. Because I think one thing that gets confusing is, if the merchandising team and the marketing team and the optimization team all have different answers to those two questions, that things get really murky, right? So be clear and force yourself to really have a concise answer to those questions, and then make sure everyone's working to serve the same people in the same way.
And I'd yes and that, because we found that actually taking those words and putting them on your website, customer facing in the right way, can lead to higher conversion, because folks are like, oh, this is for me. and I'll
Yeah,
stick around.
I understand. Yeah. Oh, there I am. And there's
That's
something that I want. Yeah.
Last question for today, Margaret. For folks listening today who want to reach out or to learn more about you and your work, what's the best way for them to get in touch?
LinkedIn is best. Margaret Yang from MY Advisory. Yeah. And I think you'll probably link it in the show notes, right?
Of course. Yep. We'll have it
Yeah.
in the show notes. Thanks so much for being on today, Margaret. We really appreciate you taking a detour for the listeners with us today. A little different path than what we normally take, but I think some really
So fun,
great
though.
insights and ideas for folks. And to your point, Margaret, I think my last note here is folks should be thinking now about their holiday merchandising plans. And so
Oh,
be thinking
yes.
about all the way to November, December, right now as this episode is being released.
And not just your product, but your online experience too.
Thank you for tuning in to the Experiment Zone podcast. You can check out more episodes on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, and your favorite podcast apps. Check out the show notes for any websites linked in this episode, including where to connect with us on social media. We appreciate you tuning in. Remember to like, subscribe, and turn on your notifications so you'll be updated of each episode release. And visit us at experimentzone.com for all podcast updates as well. Appreciate you dropping by.